Do you know me? I'm one of the best-known cowboys in Texas. But a lot of people don't recognize me in a cowboy hat. So I just carry the American Express card. It can help you out in plenty of tough situations because you never know when you're going to be surrounded by redskins. Howdy.
To apply for the card, look for this display and take one.
The American Express card. Don't leave home without it.
Pittsburgh Steelers kicker Chris Boswell is having a season for the ages. He's 31 of 33 on his field goals, has made all 21 extra points, only 2 misses from 59 yards away. And for a team that doesn't score many touchdowns, he's clearly a significant player of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Maybe even looks like it could be an MVP season. But after all, he is a kicker, and kickers can't win the MVP.
Au contraire, my friend. That is not true. 1982, Mark Moseley won the MVP for the Washington Redskins.
You're telling me a kicker has won the MVP before?
I am telling you that Mark Moseley has won the MVP. He was a kicker in the 1982 season when the Redskins won the Super Bowl in the abbreviated season against the Dolphins. It was him who won the MVP. How about that?
Crazy. What are your memories of Mark Moseley?
Well, first of all, I remembered he had a gigantic fro. He had a big fro, very curly. He was automatic. But the thing is that he was a soccer style. He wasn't a soccer style kicker. He kicked head on, which they always made a big deal about. Mark Moseley kicked it. And being in Washington, Baltimore area during that time, he was a big deal during those days. He was always on TV, and that's kind of when the Hogs started. You had the Hogs and the Fun Bunch and the Smurfs, all these group celebrations, and then you had John Riggins, who was this incredibly eccentric character as well. But Moseley was kind of the rock of that team, but the team actually nickeled and dimed them, and he got in a contract dispute. MVP of $30,000. The team wouldn't pay him $30,000. And
was he really an MVP, or is he an asterisk MVP because it's a strike shortened year? It was a 9-game season. Like, how on earth did a kicker win the MVP?
I mean, Dan Fouts was the runner up to it. And, that was Air Coryell. And he, just was blowing it up with passing yards during that season. But I think the Redskins were just a very likable team during that time, and it really united, being Washington, and it kind of reunited the Cowboys' rivalry with the Skins. It was kind of down for that time, so I think it was, maybe some, maybe it was skewed a little bit. I don't know.
Now, 82 was a strike, correct?
Correct.
And the players went on strike. It was not a lockout. Am I right?
That is correct. Correct.
Do you think there's any chance that this was the AP with a little fuck you to the players for going on strike? We're going to vote a kicker as the MVP?
No, I don't. But I will tell you that on that team was Mark Murphy, who ended up being a labor representative for the NFL Players Association, then ended up going to actually run the Packers, and I think he was a Colgate athletic director. So he was on that team, and he was very instrumental. Maybe that's an interesting point, that maybe it was Moseley who an FU to it, but
because sports writers held a lot of power in those days, or at least like to think they held power. The baseball writers love to hold power as it relates to the NFL, to the Hall of Fame, and we're the stewards of the game. So I wonder if there was any of that going on. Because if you look at Mark Moseley, he missed 3 extra points in 1982, and extra points were from right in front.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if it's where it was. Washington. That's where the Players Association is based in Washington, and I wonder if this was Joe Gibbs. It was a great story in '82. So I wonder if, it was like, Yeah, Dan Fouts, San Diego, Mark Moseley, Washington. That's where you had, the great sports writers there. Kornheiser in his early days or earlier days. And then you had John Feinstein, I believe. And you had Shirley Povich. And you also had George Michael, because you had the George Michael Sports Machine then, and which was on WRC TV. And he was, so they were on all the time. The Redskins were on all the time. There was either local shows, there were commercials. They were, kind of the darlings of the city.
And it was their second Super Bowl. They lost 72 to the Dolphins in the undefeated season.
They did. And remember that was the one with, was that the goofy one with Gary Yepremian? I think threw the ball, and Billy Kilmer was the quarterback then.
Yeah, it was like a 4-7 Super Bowl.
Yeah, but I remember, I'm telling you, I was there in 1982, and the Redskins were a big deal in Washington, and the games were sold out, and the crowd, RFK Stadium would shake. And I've been to a game at RFK Stadium. It would absolutely shake, and it was pretty cool that. And Moseley was like the guy to come in. And I just think maybe that time and era, maybe in other words, if Moseley was on another team and say it was the Bengals, does Moseley win the MVP? I'm going to say no. I'm going to say no. The fact that the Redskins were a very good team during those days, and it was the first year of Joe Gibbs being head coach, I believe. Either it was the first or the second year of Joe Gibbs, and it really electrified the nation's capital during that time. So I
was just watching a Dolphins Redskins regular season game, like week 7 from 1990. And what was on the broadcast, they showed probably a minute of the Redskin brass band playing. Was it "Hail to the Redskins"? Is that the song that they would play?
Yeah, "Hail to the Redskins."
They actually showed. Literally, the announcers just showed this for a minute, never said a word, and just let us listen to the Redskin marching band.
Fight for all these things. Well, do you remember that they so then they had all the little pig snout, the snouts were all around town, around the hogs. And do you remember that oh God, what there was something else I was gonna it was just a super big deal. And then you had Riggo and the Diesel, and then there was the Cowboys actually got in a fight. The Cowboys mascot, it wasn't even mascots, they were fans. There was an African-American guy who wore a headdress. He got in a fist fight with a Cowboys fan, is my understanding. So you really had this rivalry that was kind of coming back, and to go to the MVP, was it like, we need to have a Redskin be the MVP? Like, in those days, like,
you have to wonder how much PR was involved in some way, shape, or form, or did they just use the fact that it was a 9-game season, that the kicker, could stand out in a 9-game season? It's just very odd. I don't remember an MVP of any other sport being such a bizarre as a kicker winning it in 1982 in the NFL.
Yeah, I don't either. It's like, but you do have it in baseball. You've had Raleigh Fingers.
In baseball, you haven't had a middle reliever win the MVP.
No, Jesse Orozco, a setup man, wins the MVP.
Greatest pitching line ever. I swear to God, there's a season where he had like 97 appearances and 21 innings.
Yeah, because it was just the one
batter. That's all.
The Orozco rule. But I think that in football, the NFL was not like it is today. I mean, remember you had free agents,
and I don't think people even cared who won the MVPs back then. It didn't mean anything.
No, you didn't have Madden. You didn't have somebody to put on the cover of Madden.
That's right.
Right. You remember, you didn't have, that was a league that was, baseball was king during that time.
Yeah, Super Bowl MVPs mattered, but not regular season MVPs. Like I couldn't tell you I couldn't name for you half the MVPs of the NFL in the 80s. I have no clue.
Well, we talked about Timmy Smith. Are we talking about Super Bowl? Because
No, I mean, just the regular season MVPs. It was not something that it's become lately. Look, you can't mention Lamar Jackson's name without people saying two-time league MVP. Everybody knows that today. Back then, it didn't really matter.
no, and 82, sticking with 82, the thing about it is that season, that Super Bowl was also that Super Bowl was also the year with the Rigo run.
Mm-hmm.
And, I forgot what they got, 40 chip. I can't remember, 48 chip. But that was such an interesting game because you had, Rigo and the Diesel, but then you also had the storylines of that are great. David Woodley was the quarterback for the Dolphins when Woodley got hurt, or not hurt, but Woodley, they lost in the Super Bowl. The next year, the Dolphins went from being a defensive team with the Killer Bees to end up going to drafting Dan Marino and change the whole scheme.
Yeah, because they were drafting at the end of the first round and never thought a Marino would still be sitting there.
Right, because the Steelers ended up dropping or passing on him, which ended up getting Kenny Pickett because of...
Yeah, they took Gabe Rivera instead.
Who ended up getting a car accident. But yeah, so David Woodley, the late, great David Woodley, really, that Super Bowl really transformed, the Dolphins organization. But it was really like, the nation's capital. I think that is why he won the MVP, because Boswell has been, going back to Boswell's been a Super Bowl, or has been with the Steelers for a long time. I don't know if this is his 10th season.
No, I want to say it's been 5, 6, 7 years that he's been with the Steelers.
Okay. He's money in the bank, right? He is, backing up for a second, we talk about points leaders, right? When you were a kid, when I would collect football cards, you'd say points leader. And it was always the kicker who was the points leader. So you would think naturally the points leader, that was a big deal, being the leader in points. Well, you now know why the points leader, but when you were a kid, didn't you, oh my God, he's the points leader. Did you ever ask questions like, what does that mean?
I kind of knew, but it just didn't, didn't really stick out to me. What I would say though is that in the MVP conversation, baseball MVPs were the thing of that time. You knew who won the league MVP in baseball. That was really an important thing. Football MVPs in the early and mid 80s didn't mean much.
Football wasn't what football is today.
Football awards didn't mean much back then.
No. And you didn't have...
Baseball was the award sport.
Baseball was the award sport. So, is it, which poses a question, is a Chris Boswell, should he be an MVP? It's not going to happen. But
my answer would be no, because Mark Moseley shouldn't have been one either.
The truth comes out.
So if Moseley never won the MVP, there'd be nothing to even go, why would you ever even consider? But if he won it with those pedestrian stats, in my judgment, you almost say, well, Boswell's going to have a better year. Boswell's on pace to break the total number of field goals made in a season, which is more about the offense that he kicks after than it is anything else.
But how much is timing during that, that time? I think you kind of covered it. In 1982, they were coming off a strike year. It was a resurgence of the Washington Redskins, which at the time was still, they've had lean years, but that was an iconic franchise during that time. So the fact that they had a kicker who was, helping them win games and getting them to the Super Bowl is an emotional story. Whereas Chris Boswell would not be an emotional story. I think the storyline of Mark Moseley is what put that over the top. I could be wrong.
It's just a strange thing that there's this kicker who won the MVP out of nowhere.
But I would argue to you, and we had talked about this earlier offline, but I would tell you that, Justin Tucker, when before this season, is an MVP. If you were going to vote for a kicker as an MVP, Justin Tucker would be an MVP. Because literally, if you could kick from almost half the field and be an automatic, you literally could probably score points every single time you have the ball, because you can literally get the midfielder past to kick. Is that worth an MVP?
No, but it means he's a very accurate kicker.
Right. Now you were asking, but the other question you were asking me, you had posed is, why are kickers so much stronger with their legs today?
Stronger and more accurate than ever.
Why do you think that is? I have my reasons. I think it was because, well, you tell me yours, I'll tell you.
I mean, clearly there has to be some level of strength training technology or the ability to train in a more focused way. I'd have to be. The other thing is, most of the kickers that back then, if I remember right, they were ex-soccer players, right? A lot of the kickers had soccer background.
It's when it kind of started.
Right. Had soccer backgrounds. Whereas I don't know how many of the kickers today had soccer backgrounds, or they've been kickers in their youth, they were kicking.
Probably both. Mm-hmm. I would venture to say both, but I would say strength training, but I also think aerodynamics, maybe studying aerodynamics of where to kick the ball, launch angle, and a lot of the things that baseball has, with their diametrics, with their, with the way that they're, sabermetrics, and watching how they, if I kick these angles, and then being in the conditions indoors. There's so many stadiums indoors, and even the ones that are not, how many actually play on, how much are the elements controlling that?
It's a good question. I don't have yet to hear anybody really explain why the kicking has become so much more accurate and proficient. I mean, I was telling you, I was watching a game from, it's got to be late 80s, early 90s, Detroit Lions. Eddie Murray was the kicker. He couldn't kick 40 yards.
Right. And he was indoors, okay, for the Lions. So he's playing indoors. So what are his splits? How many field goals did he kick at home compared to, was he better at home?
I mean, I remember back in the 1989 NFL playoffs, which would be January of 90, when the Steelers beat the Houston Oilers in overtime. Gary Anderson kicked a 51-yard field goal to win that game. As a fan at the time, it was like a miracle happened. Today, 51-yarder, my expectation is it's going through.
Money in the bank. Let me ask you a question. As a golfer, you are, or a retired golfer, or a golf aficionado, how much of it is mental kicking, and how much of it is, if your technique is a little bit off, how much of that? So, if you're Justin Tucker, you've missed 2 extra points back to back this season. How much of it is it mental? We saw Steeler kickers like Jeff Reed, what's between the ears, or how much is it like my foot is a little off, or the hold was a little off? I mean, repetition, I mean, I don't know what your thoughts are as a golfer.
Well, golf, it's definitely equipment and technology has come in where I don't think that's in play with the kickers. I don't think the shoes are at a level they were, or doing something they weren't in the 80s.
No, but I'm talking about the hold, or even way the kicker's foot goes through. When you hit the ball, it's like you could just be a tiny bit off. And
yeah, because also as kicking has become so scientific or automatic, it feels like. Notice that what's gone are the barefoot kickers. I haven't seen a barefoot kicker in 20, 30 years.
Because you can get turf toe.
Really? Is that
maybe?
No, I would imagine that today I can kick with a shoe on as accurate. Like, what was the concept of why the barefoot? Would I be more accurate with my barefoot touching the ball versus my shoe?
They're free, Jerry. They're loving it. I don't know. So if you could sum up the 82, the Mark Moseley, what would be your parting shot on the 82?
Asterisk would be my parting shot. It's an asterisk. He's not a worthy MVP. Therefore, Boswell doesn't really even factor into the conversation, or any kicker ever, no matter what they do. If a kicker went 70 for 70, they ain't going to win it.
This is the Lonesome Kicker song by Adam Sandler. There was a I actually think he should be MVP that year, just because I was in around that time and know what he meant to that team, to get that team over that hump. And if that's really the MVP.
It's probably because in a 9-game season, no one player could separate themselves from other players. So they probably all chopped up the vote, if you think of it in that perspective. Because 9 games, it's hard for a player to stand out, but a kicker in 9 games going, 20 for 21 probably stood out.
Yeah, I would give the only asterisk I would give is the fact that if Mark Moseley plays on another team, he probably doesn't win the MVP. If it was with the Giants, if he wasn't in a market that was a big market, I'm one with well-known sports writers and big sports writers, and I'm gonna guess.
Do you think any of those MVP voters have buyer's remorse years later, going, "What the frick was I thinking voting for a kicker?"
No, even if they're alive, everybody's. But no, I don't think so. I think it was just the time and the era and what the NFL needed.
Well, the best part is he missed 4 kicks in the playoffs, so I love it. They give him the MVP, and then he shanks 4 of them in the playoffs.
But you know what? He went on to be a burger mogul with
5 guys.
5 guys. So there you go. He has the last laugh. So the Skins and Jack Hancock can get a nickel and dime him on $30,000, and he's a mogul in the burgers. Well, that was a great discussion, Todd, talking about 1982. It warms the cockles of my heart. I am an old guy, and talking about that and where I lived and where I grew up at the time, it was cool to talk about the Redskins and the comparison to the Steelers, Chris Boswell, different era, different time. And that's one of the things that we are always looking to talk about, of what was, what is, and analyzing it, from the classic side to today. And so on behalf of Mark Moseley, the 1982 Washington Redskins, this has been Random Fandom. I'm Andy. This is Todd. We'll see you next time.